A young black man stopped to help an elderly gentleman in a wheelchair at the airport, not knowing who he really was. The next day, as his hands shook opening an envelope, he discovered a truth that would change his life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting the only tie he owned, a navy blue hand-me-down from his older cousin. The worn fabric matched his thrifted suit, slightly too big in the shoulders, but the best he could manage. His dark eyes studied his reflection, taking in the hopeful yet anxious expression that had become all too familiar these past few months. Today was his shot, an interview at Denver International Airport for a customer service position that could finally help him support his grandmother. The stack of unpaid medical bills on his dresser caught his attention, their red, past-due stamps a constant reminder of their struggles. Grandma Rose had raised him since he was 8, working 2 jobs to keep food on their table after his parents' accident. Now her diabetes was getting worse, and the insurance barely covered half of what she needed. The prescriptions, the specialized diet, the regular checkups, it all added up to more than they could handle on her Social Security checks alone. Marcus had been job hunting for months, each rejection feeling like another stone added to the weight crushing his spirit. The customer service position at DIA wasn't just another job. It was stability, benefits, a chance to finally give back to the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him. He checked his phone. 7:15 a.m. His interview was at 9 a.m., and the bus ride to the airport would take over an hour. Living on the outskirts of Denver meant everything was a journey, but today's journey had to end differently. It had to. "Marcus," his grandmother's voice called from down the hall. "Are you eating before you go?" "Yes, Grandma," he replied, grabbing his worn backpack and heading to the kitchen. Grandma Rose sat at their small table, insulin supplies laid out beside her morning coffee. Despite her illness, she maintained that same strength in her eyes that had guided him through his toughest days. Her dark hands trembled slightly as she measured her insulin, but her smile remained steady when she saw him. "Look at my grandson," she said softly, pride evident in her voice. "You look just like your father in that suit." Marcus swallowed hard, adjusting his tie again. "Thanks, Grandma. How are you feeling today?" "Oh, don't you worry about me," she waved off his concern, though he noticed the slight wince as she shifted in her chair. "Just focus on that interview. Show them what you're made of." He made himself a quick breakfast, toast and coffee, though his stomach was too knotted with nerves to eat much. As he gathered his things, Grandma Rose reached for his hand, her touch warm and familiar. "Remember what I always tell you," she said, her eyes meeting his. "Your worth isn't in what you have or don't have. It's in who you are and what you do for others." Marcus nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "I know, Grandma. I'll make you proud today. You already do, baby. Every single day." He kissed her cheek and headed for the door, his worn dress shoes clicking against the cracked sidewalk as he walked to the bus stop. The morning air was crisp, carrying the promise of change. Marcus straightened his shoulders, clutching his backpack strapped tight. Today was his chance to turn things around, to finally be the provider his grandmother deserved. He wouldn't, let this opportunity slip away. The bus pulled up right on schedule, its doors opening with a familiar hiss. As Marcus stepped aboard, he sent up a silent prayer, hoping that for once luck would be on his side. The bus ride to Denver International Airport felt longer than usual, each mile stretching out as Marcus rehearsed potential interview answers in his head. He watched through the window as the city landscape gradually transformed into the vast expanse of the airport grounds, the iconic white peaks of DIA's tent-like roof rising against the morning sky. His phone showed 8:30 a.m. when he finally stepped off the bus. 30 minutes to find his way to the administrative offices. The massive terminal building loomed before him, its glass walls reflecting the morning sun. Marcus took a deep breath, straightened his tie one last time, and walked through the sliding doors into the bustling main terminal. The space was alive with movement. Travelers rushing to gates, reuniting families. Business people power walking with their rolling suitcases. The air smelled of coffee and cinnamon from nearby cafes, mixing with the distinct atmosphere that only airports seem to have. Marcus weaved through the crowds, his dress shoes clicking against the polished floor as he made his way toward the security checkpoint. He had his interview authorization letter ready, knowing he'd need to pass through security to reach the administrative offices. The TSA agent examined his documents with what felt like extra scrutiny, making Marcus's heart beat faster. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the agent nodded and waved him through. 8:45 a.m. Marcus picked up his pace, grateful he'd studied the airport map thoroughly the night before. The administrative offices were in the B terminal, requiring a trip on the underground train. He stood on the platform, shifting his weight from one foot to another, willing the train to arrive faster. That's when he heard it, a sound of distress that cut through the general airport noise. Marcus turned to see an elderly man in a wheelchair struggling near the platform edge. The man's wheelchair had gotten caught on something, and his carry-on bag had slipped from his lap, spilling its contents across the floor. Other passengers hurried past, some glancing at the scene but quickly looking away. The man's face showed a mix of frustration and resignation as he tried to reach for his scattered belongings while keeping his wheelchair from rolling. Marcus checked his phone again. 8:47 a.m. His chest tightened as he watched the man struggle. His grandmother's words from that morning echoed in his mind. Your worth isn't in what you have or don't have. It's in who you are and what you do for others. Damn it, Marcus muttered under his breath. Before he could second-guess himself, he was already moving toward the elderly man, his dress shoes squeaking against the floor as he changed direction. Sir? Marcus called out, approaching carefully. Would you like some help? The man looked up, relief washing over his weathered face. He was well-dressed in an expensive-looking suit, his silver hair neatly combed, but his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the wheelchair's arms. Oh, thank you, young man, the elderly gentleman said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. I seem to have gotten myself into quite a situation here. Marcus knelt down, beginning to gather the scattered items, a leather portfolio, a phone, various papers, and what looked like important documents. As he collected everything, he noticed the man's airline ticket. First class to Chicago. I'm Mr. Harrison, the elderly man said as Marcus carefully placed the items back in his bag. These old hands don't work like they used to, and this airport seems to get bigger every time I visit. I'm Marcus, he replied, securing the bag safely on the wheelchair's handles. Are you sure you're okay? The wheel seems stuck on something. Marcus examined the wheelchair, finding that one of the wheels had indeed caught on a small ridge in the floor. With careful maneuvering, he freed the wheel, then positioned the chair more securely on the platform. 8:52 a.m. The interview was slipping away with each passing minute, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to rush. Mr. Harrison seemed shaken, and leaving him alone didn't feel right. Where are you headed, sir? Marcus asked, still standing close to ensure the wheelchair was stable. Gate B14, Mr. Harrison replied. But please don't trouble yourself any further. You look like you're on your way to something important. Marcus glanced at his phone one last time, then back at Mr. Harrison. The train was finally arriving, its automated announcement echoing through the terminal. He made his decision. It's no trouble, Mr. Harrison. Let me help you get to your gate safely. The underground train hummed along its track as Marcus stood beside Mr. Harrison's wheelchair, one hand steadying it against the motion. His interview time had come and gone, each passing minute cementing the reality of his choice. Yet somehow, watching Mr. Harrison's grateful expression in the train's reflection, Marcus couldn't bring himself to regret his decision. You know, Mr. Harrison spoke up, his voice carrying over the train's mechanical sounds. Not many young people would stop to help these days. Everyone's always rushing somewhere, too busy with their own lives. Marcus managed a small smile, though his heart felt heavy. My grandmother always taught me to help others when I can. She raised me right, I guess. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The train slowed as they approached Terminal B, the automated voice announcing their arrival. Marcus carefully maneuvered the wheelchair onto the platform, making sure to avoid the small gap between the train and the platform edge. The terminal stretched before them, a long corridor filled with hurrying travelers and the distant sound of flight announcements. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," Mr. Harrison said as they made their way toward Gate B14. "Is she still with you?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, navigating through the crowd. "She's actually why I was." He hesitated, then continued. "Why I was supposed to be at a job interview this morning. She's been sick and we could use the help with medical bills." Mr. Harrison turned slightly in his chair, looking up at Marcus with sharp, intelligent eyes. "An interview? Here at the airport?" Marcus nodded, checking the gate numbers as they passed. B10.000, B11, B12.000. Customer service position. Would have included health benefits. He tried to keep the disappointment out of his voice, but it crept in anyway. "And you missed it to help me?" Mr. Harrison's voice carried a note of concern. "Some things are more important than interviews, sir," Marcus replied, echoing words his grandmother had spoken many times. Even as he said it, though, his chest tightened thinking about returning home, seeing the hope fade from her eyes when he told her what happened. They reached Gate B14, where a small crowd was already gathering for the Chicago flight. Marcus positioned the wheelchair in a comfortable spot near the priority boarding area, making sure Mr. Harrison had easy access to his belongings. "Is there anything else you need before I go, sir?" Marcus asked, checking that the wheelchair's brakes were properly engaged. Mr. Harrison studied him for a long moment, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "You're a remarkable young man, Marcus. What's your full name?" "Marcus Washington, sir." Mr. Harrison reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to Marcus. "Take this. When you get home, I want you to look me up." Marcus accepted the card, noting the simple but elegant design. The name, Richard Harrison, was printed in bold letters, followed by Harrison International Holdings and a phone number. "I don't understand," Marcus said, looking at the card, then back at Mr. Harrison. The elderly man smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "Let's just say I believe in rewarding kindness when I see it, and Marcus, I'm sorry about your interview." Before Marcus could respond, the gate agent announced priority boarding for the Chicago flight. Mr. Harrison gave him one last meaningful look before an airline assistant appeared to help him board. Marcus stood there for a moment, the business card feeling heavy in his hand. He finally turned away, his footsteps slow as he made his way back through the terminal. The morning crowds had thinned somewhat, and he found himself walking past the administrative offices where his interview should have been. Through the glass walls, he could see people in business attire moving about their day, living the life he'd hoped to step into. The sight made his throat tight. He pulled out his phone, seeing 2 missed calls from his grandmother. As he walked toward the exit, Marcus thought about how he would explain everything to her. How would he tell her that he'd given up this opportunity? But then he remembered her words from that morning, about worth being found in what you do for others. Maybe she would understand. Maybe she would even be proud. The business card seemed to burn in his pocket, a mystery he wasn't sure he should get his hopes up about. After all, how many times have opportunities seemed to be within reach, only to slip away? Still, something about Mr. Harrison's final look stayed with him, something that felt different from the empty promises he'd heard before. Marcus stepped out of the airport into the late morning sun, his interview long over, his future once again uncertain. But as he waited for the bus that would take him home, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, helping Mr. Harrison hadn't been a missed opportunity after all, but the beginning of something new. The bus ride home felt like the longest of Marcus's life. As buildings and streets passed by his window, he kept pulling out Mr. Harrison's business card, reading and rereading the embossed text until he had memorized every detail. His phone felt heavy in his pocket, the missed calls from his grandmother a reminder of the conversation he'd have to have soon. When he finally reached his stop, Marcus's feet dragged along the cracked sidewalk leading to their small house. The morning's optimism had faded, replaced by the weight of what felt like another failure. He could see Grandma Rose through the front window, sitting in her favorite chair, probably watching for his return. As he opened the front door, the familiar smell of her cooking wrapped around him. She'd made his favorite cornbread, likely as a celebration for the interview she thought he'd had. The gesture made his chest tighten even more. "Marcus? That you, baby?" She called from the kitchen. He found her at the table, medical supplies still scattered around her, but now accompanied by a fresh batch of cornbread cooling on the counter. Her face lit up when she saw him, then quickly shifted to concern as she read his expression. "Something happened," she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus sank into the chair across from her, loosening his tie. "I didn't make it to the interview, Grandma." She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. Her touch was warm, comforting, just as it had been when he was a child. "Tell me why." So he did. He told her about the elderly man in the wheelchair, about the spilled belongings and the stuck wheel, about choosing to help instead of rushing to his interview, about Mr. Harrison and the mysterious business card that now felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. As he spoke, Grandma Rose's expression changed from concern to something else, a mixture of pride and understanding that made Marcus's eyes sting with unshed tears. "Show me the card," she said softly when he finished. Marcus pulled it out, sliding it across the table. Grandma Rose picked it up, adjusting her reading glasses as she studied it. Her eyes widened slightly. "Harrison International Holdings," she read aloud. "Marcus, do you know who Richard Harrison is?" Marcus shook his head. "No, just that he was headed to Chicago, first-class flight." Grandma Rose placed the card back on the table, a thoughtful look crossing her face. "That man owns one of the largest investment firms in the country. I've seen him on the news. He's known for his philanthropy, especially helping young people from underprivileged backgrounds." Marcus stared at the card with new eyes, his heart beginning to race. You think he might actually help somehow?" "I think," Grandma Rose said, pushing the card back toward him, "that God puts certain people in our path for a reason. You did the right thing this morning, Marcus. Not because of who he turned out to be, but because it was the right thing to do." Marcus picked up the card again, running his thumb over the raised lettering. "But what if nothing comes of it? The airport job. It would have been a sure thing." Grandma Rose's laugh was soft but firm. "Baby, ain't nothing in this life a sure thing, except doing right by others. That's what your parents believed, and that's what I believe." She stood up slowly, making her way to the counter to cut a piece of cornbread. The movement was stiff, and Marcus could see the pain in her expression, though she tried to hide it. It was a reminder of why he needed that job, why every opportunity mattered so much. "You should call the number," she said, placing the cornbread in front of him. "What's the worst that could happen?" Marcus pulled out his phone, looking between it and the card. His grandmother was right. He had nothing to lose. Still, his hands trembled slightly as he dialed the number. The phone rang 3 times before a professional-sounding woman answered. "Harrison International Holdings, how may I direct your call?" Marcus swallowed hard, his grandmother's encouraging nod giving him strength. "My name is Marcus Washington. Mr. Harrison gave me his card this morning at the airport. He asked me to call." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of typing. "Ah yes, Mr. Washington. Mr. Harrison said you might be calling. Please hold while I connect you to his assistant." Marcus's heart pounded as the line switched to hold music. His grandmother reached across the table, squeezing his free hand. The cornbread sat untouched, steam still rising from its golden surface, as both of them waited to see what might come next. "Please hold for Mr. Harrison," the assistant's voice returned after what felt like an eternity. Marcus's grip tightened on his grandmother's hand as he heard shuffling on the line, followed by the familiar southern drawl he'd heard just hours ago. "Marcus Washington." Mr. Harrison's voice was warm, almost amused. "I wondered how long it would take you to call." "Yes, sir," Marcus managed, his throat dry. "Thank you for taking my call." "Thank you for helping an old man this morning," Mr. Harrison replied, "especially considering what you gave up to do so. Tell me, Marcus, do you know what I do?" Marcus glanced at his grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. "My grandmother says you run an investment firm, sir. She's seen you on the news. Smart woman, your grandmother. And yes, that's part of what I do, but what I really do, Marcus, is invest in people. People who show character, integrity, and kindness, even when they think no one's watching." Marcus sat straighter in his chair, his heart pounding. "Sir, I have a proposition for you," Mr. Harrison continued. "I'm opening a new branch office in Denver next month. We need young people with integrity, people who understand that success isn't just about making money. It's about doing right by others." The kitchen seemed to fade away as Marcus listened, barely daring to breathe. "I'd like to offer you a position," Mr. Harrison said. "Entry level, of course, but with full benefits starting day one. The salary would be significantly more than what the airport was offering. More importantly, it includes comprehensive health insurance for both you and your grandmother." Marcus's hand trembled so badly he had to put the phone on the speaker, setting it on the table. Grandma Rose's eyes were glistening with tears. I don't know what to say, sir," Marcus stammered. "I don't have any experience in investment banking. I haven't even finished my degree." "You have something more valuable than experience, son," Mr. Harrison interrupted. "You have character. Everything else can be taught. The starting salary is $45,000 a year, with full medical, dental, and vision coverage. There's also a tuition reimbursement program if you'd like to complete your education." Marcus looked at his grandmother, who was now openly crying, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. "Why me?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "There must be hundreds of qualified people." "Let me tell you something, Marcus." Mr. Harrison's voice grew serious. "This morning I was testing my new wheelchair. I'm having surgery next week and my doctor wanted me to practice using one. I could have gotten up any time, but I wanted to see how people would react. Dozens passed by. Some looked away. Some pretended not to see. But you stopped. You helped, even though it meant sacrificing something important to you. That's the kind of person I want working for me." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not even trying to hide his emotions anymore. "Thank you, sir. I don't know how to repay this kindness." "Pay it forward, son. That's all I ask. My assistant will email you the paperwork. Be at the office at 9 a.m. Monday morning. And Marcus," "Yes, sir?" "Bring your grandmother to the office next week. I have an excellent endocrinologist on retainer who specializes in diabetes management. I'd like her to have a consultation." After the call ended, Marcus and his grandmother sat in stunned silence. The cornbread had gone cold, forgotten on the table between them. Finally, Grandma Rose spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "See what happens when you listen to your heart instead of your fears," she said, squeezing his hand. "Your parents would be so proud of you, baby. So proud." Marcus stared at the phone, still trying to process everything that had happened. Just this morning, he'd been worried about making ends meet, about his grandmother's health, about their future. Now, in the span of a few hours, everything had changed, all because he'd stopped to help someone in need. His email pinged. The paperwork from Mr. Harrison's assistant had already arrived. As he opened it on his phone, reading through the offer letter with its list of benefits and opportunities, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Real, tangible hope. "I think it's time we finally had that cornbread," Grandma Rose said, wiping her eyes and standing up slowly. "We've got something to celebrate after all." Marcus got up and hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with the sweetness of cornbread. "Thank you for teaching me to always do the right thing," he whispered. "Oh, baby," she replied, patting his back. "You taught me just as much. Now let's eat before this bread gets any colder. We've got a busy week ahead of us." Marcus pulled back, smiling through his tears. His grandmother was right. They had a lot to prepare for. But for the first time in years, the future didn't look like a mountain they had to climb. It looked like a door opening to possibilities they'd only dreamed of. The weekend passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Marcus spent Saturday morning at the thrift store, using their meager savings to buy 2 more dress shirts and a pair of decent shoes. Each purchase felt like an investment in his future, even if the shirts needed ironing and the shoes were slightly scuffed. His grandmother insisted on helping him prepare, despite her fatigue. She sat at the kitchen table, showing him how to properly iron his shirts the way his father used to do, her hands guiding his even when they trembled. "Your father always said presentation matters," she explained, demonstrating how to create a crisp collar. "Not because of what others think, but because of how it makes you carry yourself." On Sunday evening, as Marcus laid out his clothes for the next day, his email pinged again. It was from Mr. Harrison's assistant, Lisa, with detailed instructions for Monday morning. The new office was in a downtown high-rise, the kind of building Marcus had only ever walked past, never entered. The email included security clearance information, a temporary badge, and a full schedule for his first week of training. "Are you nervous?" Grandma Rose asked from his doorway, leaning on her cane. Marcus nodded, running his hand over the freshly ironed shirt. "What if I'm not good enough, Grandma? What if I can't learn everything fast enough?" She made her way to his bed, sitting down slowly. "Come here." She patted the space beside her. Marcus sat, feeling like a child again, seeking comfort from his grandmother's wisdom. "Let me tell you something about your father," she began, her voice soft with memory. "When he first started working at the factory, he was terrified. No experience, no fancy education. But you know what he had? Heart, determination, the willingness to learn. That's all anyone can ask of you, baby." Marcus swallowed hard, thinking about his father. "I wish they were here to see this." "They are," Grandma Rose said firmly, patting his hand. "They're watching over you every step of the way. Now, you need to get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." But sleep proved elusive. Marcus lay awake most of the night, watching the numbers on his clock tick by. He thought about Mr. Harrison, about how a simple act of kindness had opened a door he never even knew existed. He thought about his parents, wondering if they'd be proud of the man he was becoming. At 5 a.m., he finally gave up on sleep and got up to shower. He took extra time getting ready, making sure every detail was perfect. His grandmother was already awake when he emerged from his room, despite his protests that she should rest. "Had to make sure you ate a proper breakfast," she said, setting a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. "Can't start your new life on an empty stomach." The morning bus ride downtown felt surreal. Marcus watched the sun rise over the city, painting the skyscrapers in shades of gold and pink. Other passengers in business attire filled the bus, people he used to envy, thinking their lives were so different from his. Now he was one of them, even if he didn't quite feel like it yet. The high-rise lobby was intimidating, all marble floors and gleaming elevators. Marcus approached the security desk, his temporary badge clutched in his hand. The security guard, an older man with kind eyes, checked his credentials and directed him to the 35th floor. "Welcome aboard," the guard said with a genuine smile. "Mr. Harrison's new crew, right?" Marcus nodded, surprised. "Yes, sir. He's got a good eye for people, that man. You'll do fine." The elevator ride gave Marcus a moment to breathe, to gather his thoughts. His reflection in the polished doors showed someone he barely recognized. A young professional, ready to start his career. His father's son. When the doors opened to the 35th floor, Marcus stepped into a world of floor-to-ceiling windows and modern office furniture. An elegant reception desk dominated the entrance, where a familiar face waited. "Marcus Washington?" Lisa, Mr. Harrison's assistant, stood up with a warm smile. She was younger than he expected, maybe in her early 30s, with a friendly demeanor that immediately put him at ease. "Right on time. Mr. Harrison specifically asked me to help you settle in today." She led him through the office, pointing out different departments and introducing him to various team members. Everyone seemed genuinely welcoming, nothing like the cold corporate environment he'd feared. "And this," Lisa said, stopping at a small but well-appointed desk near a window, "is your space. Mr. Harrison wanted to make sure you had a view. Said something about reaching for the sky?" Marcus touched the desk lightly, still hardly believing this was real. A new computer sat ready, along with a leather portfolio embossed with his name. "One more thing," Lisa added, handing him a sealed envelope. "Mr. Harrison asked me to give you this once you were settled. Take a moment to read it, then we'll start your orientation." Marcus sat down in his new chair, the leather smooth and comfortable beneath him. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope, unfolding the letter inside. Marcus unfolded the letter with careful fingers, recognizing Mr. Harrison's elegant handwriting. "Dear Marcus, welcome to your first day at Harrison International Holdings. As you begin this new chapter, I want to share something with you. Years ago, I was where you are now, young, uncertain, but full of potential. Someone took a chance on me, just as I'm taking a chance on you. They saw past my circumstances to who I could become. That morning at the airport wasn't a coincidence. I make it a habit to test potential employees in real-world situations. Character reveals itself not in interviews, but in moments when we think no one is watching. You showed me exactly who you are, someone who puts others first, even at personal cost. Your desk faces east for a reason. I want you to see the sunrise every morning and remember that each day brings new opportunities to grow, to learn, and to help others. The portfolio on your desk belonged to my first mentor. Now it's yours. Make me proud, son. Richard Harrison." Marcus read the letter twice, his vision blurring slightly. He carefully folded it and placed it in his new portfolio, just as Lisa returned with a stack of training materials. "Ready to begin?" she asked, her smile understanding. The morning passed in a whirlwind of orientation sessions, paperwork, and introductions. Marcus absorbed everything he could, taking detailed notes in his new portfolio. By lunchtime, his head was spinning with information about investment strategies, client relations, and company policies. "How about we take a break?" Lisa suggested, noticing his overwhelmed expression. "The cafe downstairs has great sandwiches. My treat for your first day." Over lunch, Lisa shared stories about her own start at the company 5 years ago. "Mr. Harrison has a way of finding people," she explained, stirring her coffee. "He doesn't just look at resumes. He looks at heart." "I still can't believe this is happening," Marcus admitted. "Yesterday I was worried about bus fare. Today I'm learning about portfolio management." Lisa leaned forward, her expression serious. "Can I tell you something? Mr. Harrison doesn't make mistakes when it comes to people. If he chose you, it's because he saw something special. Trust that." When they returned to the office, Marcus found several emails waiting for him. One confirmed his grandmother's appointment with the endocrinologist for Wednesday. Another contained his benefits package, health insurance that would start immediately, not after a probation period. As he clicked through the documents, a shadow fell across his desk. Looking up, Marcus found himself face to face with Mr. Harrison himself, standing tall and straight, no wheelchair in sight. "Sir." Marcus stood quickly, nearly knocking over his chair. "At ease, son," Mr. Harrison chuckled. "How's your first day treating you?" "It's incredible, sir. Thank you again for this opportunity." Mr. Harrison's eyes crinkled with warmth. "Thank you for proving my instincts right. Listen, I have a favor to ask. There's a board meeting this afternoon. Would you mind sitting in, just observe and take notes? It'll be good exposure for you. Marcus nodded eagerly. Of course, sir. I'd be honored. Good man. Lisa will show you to the conference room. Mr. Harrison turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Marcus? That tie could use an upgrade. There's a shop downstairs. Put it on my account. Before Marcus could protest, Mr. Harrison was gone, leaving him standing beside his desk, wondering if this was all a dream. Lisa appeared moments later, grinning at his expression. He does that, she said. Gets a kick out of surprising people. Come on, let's get you that tie before the meeting. Can't have you facing the board without proper armor. As they rode the elevator down to the shop, Marcus pulled out his phone to text his grandmother. You won't believe what's happening. God is good. Her reply came quickly. He sure is, baby. He sure is. Standing in the high-end men's shop, running his fingers over silk ties that cost more than he used to make in a day, Marcus felt the full weight of how much his life had changed in just a few days. From missing a job interview to sitting in on board meetings, it seemed impossible. Yet here he was, about to watch some of the most successful people in the business world make decisions that would affect thousands. This one, Lisa said, holding up a deep blue silk tie with subtle silver stripes. It says future executive without trying too hard. Marcus looked at his reflection in the store mirror as Lisa helped him tie it properly. The man looking back at him stood straighter, looked more confident. Maybe that's what his grandmother meant about presentation. It wasn't about the clothes themselves, but about how they made you feel. Ready to face the board? Lisa asked, adjusting the tie one final time. Marcus took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Ready as I'll ever be. The board meeting was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The conference room occupied the entire corner of the 35th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of downtown Denver. Around a massive mahogany table sat 12 men and women in impeccable suits, their faces a mix of experience and authority. Marcus sat quietly beside Lisa, taking detailed notes as Mr. Harrison led the meeting. They discussed market trends, investment strategies, and the company's expansion plans. Though much of the terminology went over his head, Marcus wrote everything down, determined to research and understand each unfamiliar term later. And now, Mr. Harrison said about halfway through the meeting, I'd like to discuss our community investment initiative. As you know, we're launching a new program to support promising individuals from underprivileged backgrounds. Marcus here is our first participant. All eyes turned to Marcus, who felt his face grow warm. Mr. Harrison continued, I believe this program will not only transform lives, but also bring fresh perspective to our company. Marcus has already demonstrated the kind of character we need more of in this industry. One of the board members, a distinguished-looking woman with silver hair, spoke up. Mr. Harrison told us about your airport encounter, Mr. Washington. Very impressive. We'll be watching your progress with great interest. After the meeting, Marcus stayed behind to organize his notes. Mr. O. Harrison approached, settling into the chair beside him. Overwhelming, isn't it? He asked, his voice kind. Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. But exciting, too. I want to learn everything I can. That's the spirit. Mr. Harrison picked up Marcus's portfolio, examining the notes he'd taken. You know, when I first started, I couldn't tell a bond from a stock option. But I had people who believed in me, who took the time to teach me. Now it's my turn to pass that on. He pulled out a business card, different from the one he'd given Marcus at the airport. This one had direct numbers for both his office and mobile phone. I meant what I said in that letter, Marcus. I see something special in you. But this journey won't be easy. There will be people who doubt you, who think you don't belong here. Prove them wrong. Marcus took the card, holding it carefully. I won't let you down, sir. I know you won't. Now, how about we discuss your grandmother's appointment? I've arranged for a car to pick her up on Wednesday. The endocrinologist, Dr. Chen, is one of the best in the country. They spent the next few minutes going over the details. Mr. Harrison had thought of everything, transportation, preliminary tests, even a follow-up nutrition consultation. For the first time in years, Marcus felt the weight of his grandmother's health concerns beginning to lift. As the day wound down, Lisa helped Marcus set up his computer and email. His inbox already contained training schedules, welcome messages from colleagues, and an invitation to the company's monthly social gathering. "One more thing," Lisa said, pulling out a small box. "Company phone. We're all connected through a secure messaging system. You'll need it for client communications once you're trained up." Marcus opened the box to find the latest iPhone model, something he'd never been able to afford before. The reality of his new position hit him again, bringing a fresh wave of gratitude. At 5 p.m., as he gathered his things to leave, Mr. Harrison appeared one final time. "Good first day, Marcus. Remember, you're not just here to learn about finance. You're here to learn how to make a difference in people's lives. That's what Harrison International is really about." On the bus ride home, Marcus couldn't stop smiling. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "You crushed it today. See you tomorrow, future executive." He found his grandmother waiting up for him, despite his insistence that she shouldn't. The moment he walked in, she could tell something was different. "Look at you," she said softly. "You're glowing." Marcus sat down beside her, loosening his new tie. "Grandma, it's amazing. The people, the office, everything. And Mr. Harrison? He's incredible. He's not just giving me a job, he's giving me a future." She reached out, touching his face gently. "I always knew God had big plans for you, baby. Always knew it." "Wednesday's going to change everything," he said, taking her hand. "The doctor they're sending you to. He's supposed to be the best, and the insurance covers everything, Grandma. Everything." Tears welled in her eyes. "All because you stopped to help someone in need. Just like I always taught you." Marcus hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with the cornbread she'd baked again to celebrate his first day. "Get some rest," he said, helping her up. "Tomorrow's another big day." As he lay in bed that night, Marcus thought about everything that had happened. Just a week ago, he'd been desperate for any job that would help pay the bills. Now he was on a path he'd never even dared to dream about. His last thought before drifting off to sleep was of Mr. Harrison's words. He wasn't just there to learn about finance. He was there to learn how to make a difference. The next few weeks passed in a blur of learning and growth. Marcus threw himself into every aspect of his new role, arriving early each morning to study market reports and staying late to master the complex software systems. His dedication didn't go unnoticed. One morning, about 3 weeks into his new position, Lisa stopped by his desk with an unusual request. "Mr. Harrison wants you to sit in on a client meeting today," she said, placing a folder in front of him. "It's a big one, the Thompson Family Trust. Usually new employees don't get this kind of exposure for months." Marcus opened the folder, scanning the details. The Thompson account was worth millions, representing 3 generations of family wealth. His heart raced at the thought of being involved with such a significant client. "Are you sure I'm ready?" he asked, straightening his tie, one of 3 new ones Mr. Harrison had insisted he add to his wardrobe. Lisa nodded firmly. "Mr. Harrison specifically requested you. He says your perspective could be valuable." The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main conference room. Marcus spent his lunch hour reviewing the Thompson file, making sure he understood every detail he could. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. "Preparation is the foundation of confidence." Speaking of his grandmother, her health had improved dramatically under Dr. Chen's care. The new medication regimen and nutrition plan were working wonders, and for the first time in years, she had enough energy to tend to her small garden again. At 1:55 p.m., Marcus entered the conference room, taking a seat beside Mr. Harrison. The Thompson family filed in moments later, father, son, and grandson, each carrying themselves with the kind of confidence that old money breeds. "Gentlemen," Mr. Harrison began, "thank you for coming today. I'd like you to meet Marcus Washington, one of our most promising new associates. The meeting proceeded smoothly until they reached the topic of charitable giving. The youngest Thompson, probably in his early 30s, argued for reducing their philanthropic commitments to maximize returns. In this market, he insisted, we need to focus on growth, not giving away money. Marcus felt Mr. Harrison's eyes on him. Taking a deep breath, he spoke up. If I may, he started, his voice steadier than he felt. I've been studying your family's historical returns. Your highest performing years actually coincided with your periods of greatest charitable involvement. There's a correlation between community investment and market performance. The room fell silent. Marcus continued, pulling up charts he'd prepared during his lunch review. When your grandfather established the Thompson Education Fund in 1985, your portfolio saw a 23% increase the following year. Similar patterns followed your hospital wing donation in 1992 and the community center in 2008. Community goodwill creates business opportunities. The eldest Thompson leaned forward, studying the charts with interest. You've done your homework, young man. Richard, where did you find this one? Mr. Harrison smiled. He found me, actually. Show me the kind of character your father used to talk about, doing the right thing when no one's watching. After the meeting, which ended with the Thompsons committing to increase their charitable giving, Mr. Harrison called Marcus into his office. That was impressive, he said, gesturing for Marcus to sit. You saw something even I missed in those numbers. But more importantly, you stood up for what you believed in. I just remembered what you said about making a difference, Marcus replied. It's not just about the returns. Mr. Harrison nodded, pulling out a document from his desk. That's exactly why I'm promoting you. Junior account manager. Effective immediately. It comes with a substantial raise and your own client portfolio to manage. Marcus stared at the promotion letter, stunned. Sir, I've only been here 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks, you've shown more potential than most people do in 3 years. You understand what we're really doing here. It's not just about making money, it's about making a difference. That evening, Marcus couldn't wait to share the news with his grandmother. He found her in the garden, her color better than it had been in months, tending to her tomato plants. Grandma, he called out, still in his suit but not caring as he knelt beside her in the dirt. You're looking at Harrison International's newest junior account manager. She pulled off her gardening gloves, tears welling in her eyes as she hugged him. My baby, she whispered. Your parents are smiling down on you right now, you know that? Marcus held her tight, thinking about how much had changed since that morning at the airport. One simple act of kindness had opened doors he never knew existed, but it was his hard work and character that were keeping them open. Mr. Harrison says it's just the beginning, he told her. Says I have real potential in this field. His grandmother pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. You have potential in everything you do, baby, because you have what matters most, a good heart. 6 months passed, and Marcus's life had transformed in ways he could hardly believe. His promotion to junior account manager had come with an office of his own, small, but with the same eastward-facing view Mr. Harrison had initially promised. More importantly, his grandmother's health had stabilized under Dr. Chen's care, and they'd even been able to move to a better apartment closer to downtown. One crisp autumn morning, Marcus arrived at work to find an urgent meeting request from Mr. Harrison. When he entered the familiar corner office, he found his mentor standing at the window, watching the sunrise. Marcus, Mr. Harrison turned, smiling. How would you feel about taking on a special project? Of course, sir. What did you have in mind? Mr. Harrison gestured to a chair and sat down across from him. Remember how you got here? That moment of kindness in the airport? Marcus nodded. How could he forget? Well, I want to institutionalize that principle. Create a formal program to identify and recruit promising individuals who demonstrate exceptional character. I want you to hear it. Marcus sat up straighter. Sir? You're living proof that success in this industry isn't just about degrees or connections. It's about character, determination, and the willingness to help others. I want you to help me find more people like you." The proposal was ambitious. Mr. Harrison wanted to establish the Harrison Initiative for Community Excellence, HIC, a program that would identify candidates through real-world scenarios, just as Marcus had been discovered. It would provide full training, mentorship, and career development opportunities to those selected. "You'll need to travel," Mr. Harrison continued. "Visit different cities, set up the infrastructure, and work with local community leaders. It's a big responsibility, but I think you're ready." Marcus thought about how his life had changed because someone took a chance on him. The opportunity to offer that same chance to others was overwhelming. "When do we start?" he asked. Mr. Harrison grinned. "That's what I wanted to hear. First stop is Chicago next week. I've already cleared it with Lisa. She'll help you with the arrangements." That evening, Marcus shared the news with his grandmother over dinner in their new apartment. The space was bright and modern, with an elevator that made it easier for her to get around. Her diabetes was under better control now, and she'd even started teaching Sunday school again at their church. "A whole program?" she asked, her eyes shining with pride. "Oh, Marcus, this is wonderful. You're going to change so many lives." "Just like you changed mine," he replied, reaching for her hand across the table. "Everything I am, everything I've accomplished, it's because you taught me what really matters." She squeezed his hand. "Your parents would be so proud of the man you've become, not because of the success or the money, but because of your heart. You never lost sight of what's important." The next week flew by as Marcus prepared for his trip to Chicago. Mr. Harrison had arranged for him to stay at the Drake Hotel, the same place where, as a young man, Harrison himself had once worked as a bellhop before getting his own life-changing opportunity. The night before his departure, Marcus stood in his office, packing up his laptop. The city lights twinkled below, and he could see his reflection in the window. Confident, professional, purpose-driven. He thought about the scared young man who'd once helped an old man in a wheelchair, never dreaming where that simple act would lead. His phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Harrison. "Remember, we're not just building wealth, we're building legacies. Safe travels, son." Marcus smiled, thinking about all the lives they were about to change. He'd gone from missing a job interview to helping create opportunities for others. His grandmother had always said God works in mysterious ways, and now he understood what she meant. As he locked his office and headed home, Marcus passed the security guard, the same kind-faced man who'd welcomed him on his first day. "Big things ahead, Mr. Washington?" the guard asked with a knowing smile. Marcus nodded, thinking about the future. "Big things indeed, sir. Big things indeed." That night, as he packed his suitcase, Marcus came across the original business card Mr. Harrison had given him at the airport. It was worn now, the edges soft from being carried in his wallet for so long. He placed it carefully in his new leather portfolio, a reminder of where he'd come from and where he was going. Tomorrow he will begin a new chapter, not just in his own story, but in the stories of countless others who, like him, just needed someone to believe in them, someone to see past their circumstances to their potential. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. "Your worth isn't in what you have or don't have. It's in who you are and what you do for others." Marcus was ready to prove just how true those words were. Marcus's first month implementing the Harrison Initiative for Community Excellence exceeded all expectations. In Chicago, he identified 3 promising candidates: a young woman who'd given up her train seat to help an elderly couple with their luggage, a college dropout who'd stopped to help change a tire in the rain, and a restaurant server who'd paid for a homeless man's meal out of his own pocket. Today, back in Denver, Marcus stood before the board of directors presenting his progress report. The conference room felt different now, no longer intimidating, but filled with possibilities. "The HICE program has already garnered attention from major media outlets," Marcus explained, clicking through his presentation. "More importantly, it's changing lives. Our first 3 recruits begin training next week." Mr. Harrison, sitting at the head of the table, beamed with pride. After the meeting, he pulled Marcus aside. "You've exceeded every expectation," he said, leading Marcus to his office. "But I have one more challenge for you." On Mr. Harrison's desk lay a familiar-looking wheelchair. Marcus's heart skipped a beat as understanding dawned. "Your turn," Mr. Harrison said, eyes twinkling. Time to find the next Marcus Washington. The next morning found Marcus at O'Hare International Airport, sitting in the wheelchair, pretending to struggle with his briefcase. Dozens of people rushed past, their eyes averted. Some glanced his way but quickly looked away. He understood now why Mr. Harrison had chosen this test. It revealed character in its purest form. After nearly an hour, a young woman stopped. She couldn't have been more than 20, wearing waitress clothes and carrying a backpack. "Sir," she said softly, "do you need help?" Her name was Sarah Martinez. She was running late for a job interview at a diner, but she stopped anyway, just like Marcus had done all those months ago. "Why did you stop?" Marcus asked her, standing up from the wheelchair. "You're clearly in a hurry." Sarah blinked in surprise at seeing him stand, but answered honestly. "My mom always says we're all one bad day away from needing help. I could what? Konta waden 19 natanekari. Where's that curse? They be einmai." Marcus pulled out his business card, not Mr. Harrison's old one, but his own, Executive Director of Community Initiatives, Harrison International Holdings. "How would you like to change your life, Sarah?" That evening, back in Denver, Marcus sat with his grandmother in their apartment, sharing the story over dinner. "She reminded me of myself," he said, twirling spaghetti on his fork. "Same look in her eyes. Desperate for a chance, but not willing to compromise her values to get it." His grandmother nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "The circle keeps turning. Now you're the one holding the door open for others." "Mr. Harrison is talking about expanding the program nationwide," Marcus continued. "Says we could help hundreds of people by this time next year. And it all started because you helped an old man in a wheelchair," his grandmother mused. "God's plans are bigger than our own, aren't they?" Marcus thought about Sarah, about the hope in her eyes when he'd explained the opportunity. The same hope he'd felt when Mr. Harrison had given him his chance. His phone buzzed, a text from Mr. Harrison. Sarah's paperwork just came through. "She starts Monday." "Well done, son." Marcus smiled, remembering his own first day, how overwhelming and exciting it had been. Now he got to be the one guiding others through that journey. "You know," his grandmother said, reaching for his hand across the table, "your parents would be so proud of what you've built. Not just the success, but the way you're using it to help others." Marcus squeezed her hand, thinking about how far they'd come. His grandmother's health was stable, their financial worries were gone, and now he was in a position to help others find their path. "I learned from the best," he said, smiling at her. "You always taught me that true success isn't about what you gain, but what you give." Later that night, as Marcus prepared for bed, he looked out his window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Sarah was probably still processing how her life had changed today, just like he had done, all those months ago. He thought about Mr. Harrison, about the wheelchair test, about how one moment of kindness could spark a chain reaction that changed countless lives. The Harrison Initiative wasn't just a program. It was a testament to the power of human connection, of seeing the best in people when they weren't trying to show it. Tomorrow, he will start the process all over again. Another city, another wheelchair, another life to change. But tonight, he said a prayer of gratitude for that morning in the airport when he'd chosen to stop and help an old man in a wheelchair, not knowing that he was really helping himself, and now, countless others. 1 year had passed since that fateful morning at Denver International Airport. Marcus stood at the podium in Harrison International's main conference center, addressing a room full of faces, the first graduating class of the Harrison Initiative for Community Excellence. "A year ago, I was where you are now," he began, looking out at the 20 individuals who'd been discovered through acts of kindness across the country. Scared, excited, not quite believing this was real. But Mr. Harrison saw something in me that day at the airport. The same thing I saw in each of you. Character. In the front row, Sarah Martinez sat beside Mr. Harrison, her eyes shining with pride. She'd quickly become one of the program's top performers, already managing her own small portfolio of clients. Next to her sat Marcus's grandmother, healthier than she'd been in years, beaming at her grandson. Today isn't just about celebrating your completion of the program, Marcus continued. It's about celebrating the ripple effect of kindness. Each of you is living proof that one moment of compassion can change not just a life, but generations of lives. Mr. Harrison stood up, joining Marcus at the podium. When I met Marcus that day at the airport, I knew I'd found something special. What I didn't know was that I'd also found the future of this company. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to announce that effective immediately, Marcus Washington will be taking over as CEO of the Harrison Initiative for Community Excellence, which will now operate as its own division within Harrison International Holdings. And the room erupted in applause. Marcus stood stunned for a moment before Mr. Harrison pulled him into a warm embrace. "You've earned this, son," he whispered. "You're ready." Later that evening, at the celebration dinner, Marcus sat between his grandmother and Mr. Harrison, watching the graduates mingle with company executives. The program had exceeded all expectations, discovering talent in places most corporate recruiters never thought to look. "You know what I see when I look at them?" his grandmother said softly. "I see you. All of them. They're you. Different stories, different struggles, but the same heart." Marcus reached for her hand, thinking about how much had changed. They'd moved into a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood. Her health was stable, managed by the best doctors. She'd even started a community garden program, teaching others about nutrition and healthy living. "I have something to show you both," Mr. Harrison said, pulling out an envelope. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 50 years ago. The yellowed paper showed a young Richard Harrison receiving an award, and beside him stood. "Is that—" Marcus's grandmother leaned closer, her eyes wide. "Your father," Mr. Harrison confirmed. "James Washington. He was my mentor's driver. One day he saw me walking in the rain and offered me a ride. That simple act of kindness led to my first job in finance. I will never forget it." Marcus stared at the photo, at his father's young face smiling back at him. "You knew? All this time?" Mr. Harrison nodded. "When I saw you that day at the airport, I recognized something familiar, that same spirit of kindness your father had. It felt like things had come full circle." Tears welled in Marcus's grandmother's eyes as she touched the photo gently. "James always said, kindness finds its way back to you. And now," Mr. Harrison said, "the circle continues. These graduates will go out and find others, just like you found them. The ripple effect goes on." As the evening wound down, Marcus stood at the window of the conference center looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow, he will begin his new role as CEO, leading the initiative that had changed his life. Sarah would take over the recruitment program, carrying on the wheelchair test that had become a company legend. His phone buzzed with a message from Lisa. "Congratulations, boss." "Your parents would be proud." Marcus smiled, thinking about that morning a year ago when he'd stopped to help an old man in a wheelchair. He hadn't known then that he was really helping himself, or that he was part of a legacy that stretched back to his own father's act of kindness. "Ready to head home?" his grandmother asked, joining him at the window. "Yeah," Marcus replied, putting his arm around her shoulders. "You know what, Grandma? I finally understand what you always told me about doing the right thing." She looked up at him, her eyes wise and knowing. "That it's not about what you get in return?" "Exactly. It's about who you become in the process." As they walked out together, Marcus caught Mr. Harrison's eye across the room. The older man nodded, a gesture that carried the weight of everything that had brought them to this moment. past, present, and future, all connected by simple acts of kindness. The legacy would continue, one act of compassion at a time, changing lives in ways that no one could predict. And somewhere, Marcus knew. His parents were smiling down, proud of the circles that keep turning, the kindness that keeps flowing, and the son who had learned their most important lesson, that success isn't measured by what you gain, but by how many lives you touch along the way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.